Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first episode of FormIt Friday. My name is Tom Villaro. I'm the Senior Product Manager for FormIt, and I have with me from sunny Boulder, Colorado, Tobias Hathorn, our lead UX designer. So we're going to spend this first episode kind of stepping back a little bit and taking a fresh look at FormIt for some of you who either haven't heard of it or have not looked at it in maybe the past year or so, because there's been a lot of changes. So first, for the FormIt story, I like to use this quote from Theodore Levitt, economist from Harvard, who said, "People don't want a quarter-inch drill, they want a quarter-inch hole." And this really summarizes the way our team approaches designing software because tend to get so wrapped up in designing the tool itself instead of thinking really about the problem that the user is trying to accomplish or is trying to solve. And so we try to focus more on the problems and try to create tools that solve those problems for our users. So who is FormIt for? Well, it's for all of you. It's for architects and designers. We first started this about 2 years ago, looking at architects and talking with them and noticing that, a lot of architects still sketch, which is great. And we noticed a trend as the iPad came out and started to become more mature that architects were sketching using the iPad in tools like Sketchbook Pro. And we started to ask ourselves, well, what if they could just sketch, but also in 3D, and then have that 3D data translate into the BIM process? Because a lot of these architects who were sketching were still really just handing off a JPEG to a colleague. And we thought there might be a better way of doing sketching, but do it in 3D on the iPad. And a lot of people said, well, you wouldn't want to sit in front of an iPad for 8 hours a day like you do in front of Revit or AutoCAD. And that's definitely true. And we weren't trying to replicate Revit on the iPad. Instead, we came up with something called the 10-minute model, which is you're on the train or the plane or waiting in line at the coffee place, and you just need to kind of bang out a quick idea, just like you would with your sketchbook, but this time you're actually working in 3D. So why is FormIt different than other competitive tools that are out there? Well, first of all, like I said, we focused first on mobile, and now we've evolved into a really mature web client as well, and also an Android client. So really, you can choose wherever you are, whether you're at home or at the office or anywhere, like I said before, you can pop open FormIt, whether you're on your tablet or on your laptop, Mac or Windows, and you can use it. And there's no restrictions on the browser, so there's no add-ins to download. You go to the URL, formit.autodesk.com, open it up, and it works. So it's intuitive modeling, yet it's intelligent. So FormIt speaks Revit natively, meaning that you can go from a FormIt model directly into Revit, and a lot of the data, such as the levels and all of the masses, become mass families. You don't just get dead geometry when you go from FormIt to Revit. You get a really actual intelligent BIM going from FormIt into Revit. Also, FormIt is really truly collaborative. So let's see if this will play. Uh, One of the aspects of FormIt that is really interesting and pretty unique is that you can start a collaboration session with anybody, even a mobile user, as this video shows, and you can collaborate on the same model at the same time. Let me just fast forward this a little bit, and you will see the changes that your colleague is making in real time. And that's pretty unique. And you can also share the viewpoint of one of your colleagues so that you could kind of give them a tour of the design. So we really picture this being used as a kind of a digital charrette tool where the team can get together and really work out some ideas in a real fluid environment. There's no object locking, and there's no even real permissions. You can just, kind of freely collaborate on the model, whether you're on mobile or web or between some combination of those two. And just as a little tease, something that's not available yet, but that's coming very soon, and we'll talk about in the next couple webinars, is we're really focusing too on integrating analysis into the conceptual design phase. And this is something we worked on a lot with Vasari, but now we're focusing more on bringing that same idea of early analysis to inform the design, bringing that into FormIt. And this is just a little tease, and we'll definitely in the next number of weeks, we will be showing this in a lot more detail. And I think you're going to be really, really impressed. So what are users doing with FormIt now? Since it's been available for a while, we've got a lot of early adopters, some of them probably on the webinar with us today. So people like Sean Burke, who is doing his unboxed design, who's taking a shipping container and turning it into a tiny house, and he's really gone to pretty nice levels of detail with FormIt with this design. And we've seen a lot of people sort of really adopting this workflow of going from FormIt into Revit, then even into InfraWorks and 3ds Max, going back and forth, really exploring not just sort of boxy design, but really, this is from Ryan Cameron, sort of really exploring some of the formal aspects of a project, and then even 3D printing at the end state of this design. We're also seeing users really explore the idea of sketching, 2D sketching and 3D sketching, moving back and forth between tools like Sketchbook and FormIt, and on the iPad, so being able to move back and forth between these two and really marry the idea of 2D sketching and 3D sketching. And this is from Tony Caputo at Array Architects. Also really starting to, this is a real project where they're really going back and forth between Revit and FormIt and exploring the ideas of these floor plates and facade articulation in really interesting ways. And then this is actually a small firm in Brazil, and this is our first example that we've found of a real built project that started in FormIt and went into Revit. This is a rendering out of Revit, and then actually the built cafe on the coast of Brazil. So really, some of our early adopters really showing what you can do with this tool just as it is today. But then we'll talk more about where we're really even going, or we have just, it's a real green field for us to kind of push forward and really, really improve this tool. So we had one question on the webinar about this. Is this being recorded? And it's a great question. Yes, it is being recorded. And we're going to be posting it on our YouTube channel. So we will send out an email once that video is available. And we'll be recording all of these. So in case you happen to miss them or the time zone doesn't work out, or Fridays are not your best day, we'll definitely make those available. So that was kind of a really quick overview of what FormIt is and what some people are doing with it. I'm going to now switch over to Tobias, who's going to do some live demo. So let's switch over. So Tobias is calling in from, let's say, sunny Boulder, Colorado, or not?
It's beautiful today.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I'm jealous. It's very cloudy and rainy here in the Boston area.
Crummy.
Yeah, but the flowers are starting to poke through a little bit.
Awesome. Yeah. So happy Friday, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and jump into FormIt and do a little bit of more picks and clicks, showing you how to do some of the things that Tom was just showing in the PowerPoint. So I kind of wanted to start off just a quick check. Can you see my screen, Tom?
I can. I see your browser.
Okay. Great. So if you're new to FormIt, if you're new to this, just after this webinar, if you want to go and get started, we're pretty high up there on Google now, so all you really need to remember is FormIt. And as soon as you click that, you'll get Autodesk FormIt, which is our sort of official landing page, blog, gallery, all in one place. And the very next bit is the actual web app itself. You can tell because it says app right after it.
This is a great improvement, because a year ago when you typed in FormIt, you would get a portable toilet company from Australia. So we've really come out.
We've come a long way. Yeah, so when you go to the website, this is our gallery, and here are a couple of examples of some of the stuff that Tom was just showing. There's Sean's unboxed house, Seattle Public Library, the Gherkin, Wilco cover album. The list goes on. So hope to see some more examples from people attending this webinar. When you click the Try It Out button here, one other thing, I guess I'll mention the blog too, because this is where we tend to post April Fool's videos and whatnot. So if you ever want to see what's new with FormIt, this is the best place to go check it out, besides Twitter, of course. So when you come here and you go ahead and click the Try It Out button, that will launch you right into the web app. And it'll take just a moment to load, but like Tom said, it is basically loading the entire app into your browser. So once it's loaded here, you've got FormIt. You need to log in to A360 in order to save your file, if you're going to save to A360, but you can also save your file locally, and you can import files locally. So in a sense, you can't even work offline. You're not tethered to the internet. So this morning, I want to jump into some of the awesome things that I built with FormIt, like something like this, but I don't think we're going to have time to do it today. I just want to show this file as an example of, with FormIt now, you don't necessarily have to just do massing. You can go beyond massing and really get into some furniture elements that you can place into your model. You can do some nice detail elements. You can build your own staircases and curtain walls and railings and interior walls, as well as exterior walls and materials. So I won't get into this one today, but in a future session, we'll definitely cover how to do some of this stuff. This is another example of stuff you can do with FormIt now. A little bit more complicated facade articulation, doing some sort of unique components, as well as these kind of repeating elements coming out of it. And this is the model that Tom was just showing. Now with our groups functionality, it's pretty easy to control and repeat a bunch of elements and kind of just do things at a larger scale. So for today's session, I wanted to get into this model, which I did last Friday for FormIt Friday, and just kind of talk about how to set this up and how to do it and what kind of data you can get from FormIt in a 10-minute, 15-minute worth of modeling. So I'll jump back over to the web app, which is loaded up now, and I'll go ahead and name my file FormIt Friday School. And it's going to go ahead and save it. And I'll go ahead and get started. One of the first things to do is really to set the location of your project. If you've got something that you know you're going to renovate, or you've got an existing site that you're going to be working on, I find this is best for two reasons. It will give you real scale, so you'll have actual streets and actual sizes, so you're kind of working at scale with the surrounding buildings. And it also gives you true north also, so you're not thinking you're designing the south facade, but it's actually the west facade or something like that. So after you do type in your address here in the Google Maps search, you can click this blue Import Satellite Image button, and that will take you directly to where your pin is in the map, and you can crop the site and whatever surrounding area you want, and then click the Finish Importing button. And what this will do is load up that satellite image into your scene. And now you're ready to start modeling, basically. So there's one or two things I want to point out before we do that, though, and one is this grid in the background. You can see that it's going north, south, east, west, but the school is actually canted at a bit of an angle. So you can rectify that. The way the grid is set up now, if you were to start sketching, like with this pencil tool, you're going to get these green and red and blue axes all related to the grid. And the same is true if you were to place a primitive cube. You'll see that cube show up normal to that grid. And that's great if your building is north, south, east, and west, but in this case it's not. So I'll show you how to rotate that grid. First step is to grab this image. So just do a double click and you'll select the image. And if you go over to the palette on the right, you can click the properties icon, and that gives you a transparency slider for the image. So you can slide that down to about 50%, and now you can see the grid showing through the image. So that really helps to line it up. So I went ahead and unselected the image, and then if I just right-click on the canvas, this is where you can access the Rotate Grid tool. So I click that, and then click the canvas, and I can start rotating it. And just going to eyeball it so it's pretty close. And now I've got my grid rotated to line up with the image, and that way when I sketch now, everything will be normal to this street that I'm building my school next to. So I'll go ahead and double-click the image again, and then change the transparency back to full opacity so I don't see the grid through it. And now I'm pretty much ready to start modeling. All right, so the way that I tend to work in FormIt, and this might work for you, it might not work for everyone, is to kind of mass out what I'm going to do first and then start to embellish it with a little bit more detail. So in this case, the partee for the building is kind of an L shape, like along these two lines, an L shape, and then there's a couple of standalone elements at either side. So I'll just start by massing those out and show you how to use the basic drawing tools in FormIt. So as I'm moving my mouse around, it's kind of jumping, and what it's doing, that red circle, is finding the grid intersections. So that's a snapping setting, which I like to turn off when I'm trying to line things up with the map. So our little settings icon, if I click that, the very first option is snap to grid. So I usually turn that off as I'm getting started, so now it's a little bit more fluid, and I can kind of find that corner point that I want. So what I'm going to do, I guess I'm in the rectangle tool right now, but for starters, I'm going to use the pencil tool just to show off a couple of the snapping and inferencing tools that we have. So I'll get kind of close to that corner and click to start my first point. And what you see, a couple of affordances show up. I've got this blue text, so it's kind of like an editable dimension in Revit, if you're familiar with that. And I also have this red line that shows up showing me that I'm on the x-axis. So I can kind of come over here and get close and keep my mouse on it, but there's a technique called shift locking. So if I hold down the shift key right now, that red line will get a little bit thicker. And now, as I move my mouse around, my line is going to stay on that red line. And that's pretty key. That's one of the major features for sketching in 3D. So I know I want to be roughly there, and it looks like the dimension's right around 100 feet. So what I'll do is I'll click to place that dimension, and then coming off of it, now as I go in this direction, I've got a purple line, which is showing me that that's perpendicular to that previous line. So again, I'll go ahead and hit Shift to lock it, and then I'll come over here and click again to draw that line, and come over here. And this is where the shift locking comes in handy, where I start coming along this red line, I hold down Shift to lock it, and then I come over here and I can find that endpoint that I drew previously. So that way I can line up all those lines. As I come back to close the rectangle, I can shift lock again or just click at that endpoint. And as soon as I close the face, then I get this solid white sheet essentially on the ground. And if I click it once, I'm in the drag face tool, and I can click again to drag that geometry up.
One thing I like here is that there's no separate push-pull tool. Is that selection is just immediately push-pull. So you don't have to go up to the toolbar and invoke another tool. You just click on that surface and just pull it right up.
Yep, very immediate. So this is another pretty nice shortcut. You can see the editable dimension, that blue dimension, is changing as I drag up. If I know that I want to make this volume 30 feet tall, I can hit the Tab key, and that'll pop me into an editable dimension box, and I can type in 30 feet and then hit Enter, and it's going to give me that exact dimension. And this is another useful shortcut here. If I click on this edge and I check the properties for it, it'll tell me that exact dimension. And as I click on that edge, it'll tell me the exact dimension. And as I click on this edge, it'll tell me that exact dimension. So if I wanted to work with more whole numbers in this case, let me show you a cool trick to do that. You can essentially go into the line tool and then split this face at those more exact dimensions. So I'll start from right here and then come out this direction. And again, I'll hit tab as I'm moving in that direction and just type in 100 feet. And it's going to draw that line for me right there at 100 feet. And then I'll come down from that and click there. And now I've got this leftover bit of geometry here. And this is another pretty cool differentiator from other tools, that as I've got this face, hover, click to select, I can start dragging it, and I'll just wipe that out. So this is one of my favorite pro tips. Now I've got a 100-foot dimension piece of geometry that I can edit and set that to whatever dimension I want. And so I'll go ahead and clean up this one too. It's 187 feet or something like that. So I'll go ahead and make this 180 feet. Just come out this way, tab, 180, enter, and it made that point for me at the end.
And is that extra edge that you drew on top duplicated, or is that just kind of eaten by the...
Yeah, the geometry cleans it up, so now there's still just the one edge right there.
Right, so you don't have a lot of extra lines. From that little operation, you don't have an extra line lying around.
Right. So the next piece I'll show you, once you've grouped something and then drawn an edge over, it'll exist, but when it's just on top of a volume like this, you're fine. So yeah, now I've got my first volume here for the school, and I want to draw this other volume here on the back, this other L shape that goes along. And so this is where the grouping functionality comes in handy, because before we had grouping, I'll just go ahead and show you what would happen. If I drew a rectangle here and then extruded it, let's say 40 feet, now these are no longer separate volumes. Like if I do a double click to select the whole object, I'm actually going to get everything. These can't be separated. So when we introduce groups, we introduced the ability to keep things separate, to keep volumes kind of, discrete from each other. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Double click to select this volume, right click to access the context menu and see the tools that I can perform on this volume. And this button, create group, is there. And you can see in parentheses it's the letter G. That's a shortcut to make a group. So I'll go ahead and click. Now this is a group. I can tell because the selection has a little bit of stippling on it. And also it's a little hard to see, but there's a blue dotted line around it as a bounding box. All right, so now this thing's a group, and we'll talk more about groups in just a moment, but for now, this is a separate and distinct volume. And I'll go in the rectangle tool next, and as I hover here, you can see R is the keyboard shortcut for rectangle tool. Go ahead and click that, and here's another snapping inferencing trick. When I hover over this edge, or this vertex, this corner, and then start to come off of it, you can see this red dotted line appear. And that'll help me with the first corner of my rectangle so that it's in alignment with that vertex. So I'll go ahead and click there. And you can see again, I can wander off in this direction. I also can line it up with that corner if I want to. But I can also find this green axis and do the shift lock there. So I stay on that axis, and then I can start to kind of line up where that next point's going to be with other points in the scene. So I'll go ahead and click there. And actually, this is a good one. I was editing those dimensions previously on the previous volume after I'd drawn them, but you can edit them as you go. So if I click this dimension here, I can change it to 75 feet as I go. And I'm still in the rectangle tool, and that dimension is already set to something standard. So I'll zoom out a bit. You can pan and zoom. I haven't talked much about that. I'm using my mouse. So the middle mouse button, if I press that down, is to pan back and forth. And the right-click button is to orbit. So those are some pretty easy-to-use navigation controls. So as I come across, I can see my feedback in my editable dimension. I'm roughly 350 feet. So I'll just hit the tab key now, type in 350. And now I've got a volume that's that long. Hit escape to clear the dimension, clear the rectangle tool. and then I'll select that face again, drag it up, hit tab, type in 40 feet. And now I've got my L-shaped building. So again, here I'll do a double click and type in G in order to group that element. So now I've got two distinct volumes. And now I'll add in my sort of specialty pieces. And again, I'll just go into the rectangle tool, find a good starting point, come out a certain amount, hit tab, type in 40 feet, come out this direction, hit tab, type in 80 feet, hit escape to clear it, drag that top face up. And this is another place where snapping and inferencing is pretty handy. Once I already know I've got this volume at 40 feet, and I'm in this drag operation, I can start to find other things that are at the height I want to use and just hover my mouse there, and I get this blue diamond that shows up, and that's the snap icon. That means I'm aligned to that face. So as I'm dragging this, just come over here to this top volume, click there, and you can see the feedback from the dimension. That's at 40 feet. So I'll go ahead and double click this and group it, and go ahead and make this one over here. Grab that guy, click around there, come out about 50 feet, come out this way about 100 feet, and drag that face up so it lines up with that volume. All right, double click this one, group it. So this is where I was saying you got your basic massing in place, and before you start doing any kind of embellishing, adding more detail, it might be good to know kind of what area you're looking with or you're working with. So this is where FormIt has a tool called the levels. So you can come over here to the palette again, to the levels icon, click it, and you can start to add levels into your scene. So these are the equivalent of Revit levels. They're essentially horizontal datums going through your building. So you can click to add a few, and we default to give you some dimensions in there, but you can click that and change those to something more relevant if you like. Let's say level 2 is at 15 feet, level 3 is at 30 feet, and then a higher level will be at 40 feet, something like that. And now all you've done by going here to the Levels tab is make these datums so they exist in your project, but you haven't gone and applied them onto your volumes yet. So that's the next step, and you do that in the properties for these volumes. So after I select it, I could go ahead and name this if there was a particular name for this wing, but the important thing that I want to do is click this checkbox so that I'm applying levels onto this object. And as soon as I do that, you can see I've got checkboxes here that say level 1 is applied, level 2 is applied, level 3. And I also get some feedback about what that actual area volume is. So this particular wing is roughly 80,000 square feet. Hopefully, programmatically, that's what I was expecting. But that's a good way to double check it. So I can grab this volume, do the same thing. That one's about 36,000 square feet. Grab this guy and click it. So that one's just under 10,000 feet. Let's say hypothetically that this is a theater or something like that, and you wanted to target a slightly larger space. So you can grab that. I have it grouped, so in order to edit the geometry, I actually need to edit the group and then change it inside the group. And to do that, you can double click it. It's probably the fastest way to jump into a group. Otherwise, you can select it, right click, and then find the group with a pencil icon to edit it. All right, so we did drag face before to change. You can also do drag edge really easily in FormIt. So you just select an edge, you get the little feedback on the mouse cursor, and then you click to start a drag. And this is really helpful to use the axes to make sure you stay planar. So I'm going to go ahead and, you see as I start to wander around off of that purple axis, then I can start to make it a little bit crazy. But let's say I just want to pull out this corner 10 feet. I can hold down the Shift key, start dragging it out. I can hit Tab in order to set that for 10 feet and click Enter. And as I go ahead and select this now, you can see my volume is updated, or my area is updated to a little bit bigger. So it's live feedback about what the area is for that piece. And we'll do the same thing for this last piece. Grab that guy, apply levels to it and see that it's right exactly 10,000 square feet. And this one I want to edit as well. I'll go ahead and select it and drag it out so it's a little bit bigger. Tab, 20 feet. And I also want to show you that we can edit vertices and drag those too. So in this case, I'm going to split this face so that when I crease it, it's going to crease along that axis. I hover over one of these corners, and I click, and then I've got that vertex selected. I click again to start dragging it up. And so now I can just type tab, go up 10 foot, and I've got a little bit of a articulation on that piece. And I can do the same thing to the other side. Find the corner, click it, drag it up, and again, you might want to use Shift Lock here. I could start to line it up with that piece if I wanted to do that, or this side I can make it a little shorter so that aesthetically it's not quite lined up with that. So as I do that, the area would update also. Now I'm at 21,000 square feet for that volume. And already I've got a little bit of feedback on my conceptual design. I don't want it to get too big. I don't want it to be too small. And just by doing area, I'm able to get that feedback.
So Tobias,
all right.
we're going to take a couple questions. How does that sound?
Sounds good. Yeah, great.
Okay, so one of the questions, and we've gotten this one a lot, is that if I don't know my room height, I don't know my roof height, but I want to set it to 50 feet. Is there a way to easily do that? Do faces have a distance from the base plane?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And they don't. So there's two ways to go about kind of figuring that out. One is to, I'm going to double click to edit this group and then select that edge so I know how big that is. The other way is to use the line tool as kind of like a measuring tool until we implement a real measuring tool where you can click one corner and then come up and using the inference engine kind of find out that that piece is 30 feet. And what you can do, and this I do this a lot, is I'll go ahead and draw that line up, hit tab, type in 50 feet. And now I've got that line as a reference. If I click the face and then start dragging it up, I can use that line as my reference piece. And then I click to place it, and now I've got my volume at the height that I wanted.
I like that edge select tool or tip. I never knew that selecting an edge gives you the length of that edge.
Yeah, it's a pretty handy little feature. And you need to be on the properties pane in order to see it, but it's pretty nice. Also, if you select a face, you can get the area of just that face over there in the properties. So if you wanted to know the area of just that one piece, you can get that way.
So another question, is there a way to convert two faces into a curved face? I think that like a fillet.
Ah, I see. Well, you can do a fillet. I'll go ahead and draw that out here real fast. And I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but if I click here on this face or on that edge, and then I hover over this other edge, you get that red circle that shows up, and that helps you identify that exact same spot. And then you get this other red dot that shows up to give you that fillet, just that piece, that feedback. So then you can kind of go ahead and delete these pieces, and now you've got a perfectly filleted corner that you can drag up and turn into a corner. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think you're trying to do it from two faces. We can't do a solid modeling fillet just yet, but we'll talk next time about some of the other advanced modeling tools we have. Just showing that curved face made me think maybe just as time's getting a little bit short, do you want to talk about the Revit or just kind of demonstrate some of the stuff, how these come into Revit?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Do you mind if let me jump in and do a real quick example of just the component workflow, and then I'll wrap up with Revit?
Definitely.
Okay. So what I wanted to show real quick is the way that I added these sawtooth skylights and the way that I made these pieces on the end. And this is where groups are pretty powerful. So I showed using groups to keep elements distinct from each other, but where it gets really nice is here, where you want to add some sort of like bay structure on top of this. So I'll hit tab, make it 15 foot, pop out this direction, 5 foot, and then drag this piece up so it lines up with this top face. one other piece, yeah, I just thought about this. Under the settings, now if I turn snap to grid back on, and I do drag face and other operations, I'll get whole numbers instead of those kind of very specific fractions of numbers. So that's pretty handy. Once you've kind of got your satellite image done, turning snap to grid back on is recommended. So with this piece, I'll go ahead and drag this up 6 more feet, click to place it, and then I'll go ahead and split this face right there along the roof, and then click that piece, and I'm going to drag this out over in this direction, and I can hover over this and click so that I know it's lined up with that face. So now I've got this piece of geometry, and I'll go ahead and group that. I'll do an edge drag too, so it has that kind of sawtooth look. So I'll double click, select that edge, drag it up. And this is where shift locking is pretty powerful again. I'm dragging along this axis. I'll go ahead and hit shift, and then I'll come over here to this face and click there so I know that those two will be lined up. And then double click in the space will finish that group. And now I'll use the array tool, click this guy, right click, array, in order to make 9 more of these. And I'm going to go over the total length instead of just between 2 points. I'll show you an example of what that means. So if I click there to start my array and then come across, now I can tell it exactly how far I want it to go. So I'll end my array. Go ahead and hit tab and type in 160. So there's a consistent spacing between all these different sawtooth skylights. And so this is, like I was saying, the array the grouping workflow is kind of like a component in other apps and kind of like a Revit family in Revit, if you're familiar with that. If I edit one of these groups and select a face, you see they all highlight. And as I drag those, they all update. So I'll go ahead and hit tab, pop it out another 2 feet, and now I've got all these sawtooth skylights looking the same as they go along that bay. And you can do essentially the same thing on this side. I'll go ahead and click there, make a 30-foot classroom bay, pop that out 15 foot, drag that piece up so it lines up there. Come over here and drag that piece up another 15 feet or so. And over there, click. I get these red snaps for feedback that I've got intersections. I can group this piece and do the same array operation on it and come across this way. And this is a 3D array, so it is important to stay on that red axis as you come across if you want it to be lined up like that. And so this is pretty cool that you can start to carve away the geometry and edit these all at once. So draw this guy out 10 foot, draw this guy up 40 feet, come across this way another 20 feet, and you can select that face and push it in so it takes it all out. You can select a face, right click, and use a tilt face command so you can actually drag out your face a specific distance if you wanted to. So I can go ahead and push this point, that point. We've got a couple grips here to help you out with the workflow. These red grips represent the axis that you're going to use. So I'm going to tilt along this bottom face and then have it tilt out in this direction. So I can tilt that out, and I don't get any weird edges or faceting going on. Then I can grab this top edge and drag that up a little bit more. I can also drag it straight up in the blue axis rather than along that purple normal axis. It's kind of up to me what I want to do. So now I've got that bay on there, and all these other bays have updated at the same time. So yeah, I could definitely keep going with this and adding more detail, but this is kind of the basic FormIt workflow. And again, this is just a 15-20 minute model. And I'll go ahead and click Save, and then start to show some of the things you can do in Revit too. I'm working on my Mac right now, so I'm accessing through the web, but I've got a remote desktop session running where I've got Revit on my Windows machine. So I wanted to start off by showing you those other models that I was highlighting earlier. So this is that house model. And if I select this face, this roof, I can right-click and hide that element. Oops, hide in view element. And you can look inside it and see that even those little furniture pieces that I made all translate over from FormIt into Revit. And those louvers all translate. And these railings translate also. And the cool thing is that these are now families in Revit. So they're mass families, and I can continue to tweak this geometry after I come over to Revit. So if I, you can see it's called group 32. If I hover over that one, it's also group 32, which is just an instance of a family. So if I double click this one, I'll go in, oops, close that guy.
Oh my god, this is so funny.
And come down here to my family that I want to edit. I'll change the scale so the lines are a little better. And then I can grab that top face and use whatever conceptual massing widget is there. And if I make this thicker, I'll make it thicker, quite a bit thicker, so we can see the thing update. But this is live geometry in Revit. This is a mass element. So I'll go ahead and load that back into that house project that I had. Overwrite those, and they all update. So not only is it live geometry, but it's also intelligent geometry. It's a family, and those are just instances of a family. So that's one example of translating over to Control-Tab over to another project that I brought over. This is that other project with the facade articulation, and as you can see, everything came across these different louvers, these different facade creation, this different embellishment. And I'll jump over to this other one, and this is that cool kind of grouped housing project. And I don't know how many people do the massing workflow, but it's pretty amazing that you can just do wall by face. And whatever default wall you've got here, all you need to do is click on one of those existing faces, and you've got a real Revit wall based on the geometry that you've already created. And you can also, this one's maybe a little cooler, go to the curtain system and then select faces that are already defined. So in my case, I modeled this clear story in FormIt. I'll go back to it in just a second and show you. I modeled that clear story and just used a line to split the face. So as soon as I click there, I can click Create System. And what I'll do now is go to VG, go to my mask category and turn it off, and go ahead and hit Apply. So you can see these are the real geometry pieces that were created. And this is my curtain wall that was created just off of that single face. So if I jump back over here, and I can show you on this guy, that all I had to do to articulate that in FormIt was just to sketch this edge across this face in order to separate it. And then you can start to do facade articulation in Revit instead of in FormIt.
Cool. So Tobias, we should probably wrap up soon.
Sounds good.
Yeah, and we got some other questions. If we can't get to all of them, what I'll do is these get saved, and I will we'll come back to questions in the next episode. One question was, is there a sweep tool in the next update? And I said that's a great segue into our next episode, where we'll talk about some of the advanced geometry tools we will be adding. It's a question about the FormIt API. So we don't have an API yet, but we do have some really smart people taking a look at that. So next episode, we'll be talking about modeling, more advanced modeling tools. And then in May, we're going to do a live webinar from the AIA conference, and where we'll be talking in more depth about some of the pro analysis and collaboration features we have coming in May. So some more on that in the future. I just wanted to thank Tobias, my co-host, and thank everybody else for joining. We had a great attendance for this first episode, and you can follow us on Twitter at FormIt3D, where is our primary place to be kind of announcing these webinars and other activities, and then also formit.autodesk.com, where we have our image gallery and our blog, and also the app itself. So hope everybody enjoyed the first FormIt Friday, and catch us in 2 weeks for episode 2.